So we're looking at Ross chapter 20 here, and Ross chapter 20 starts on page 149. 149. This is dealing with what's called the volitional mood, or the volitional verbs. Do you know the word volition or volitional? It sounds familiar, huh? It has to do with your will. If I say do this of your own volition, that means don't do it because somebody's forcing you to. Do it because you're willing to do it. Okay? So a verb is volitional if it has to do with will or desire. And so a volitional verb is one where the speaker is expressing his or her will or desire for something to happen. So that's a volitional verb. Hebrew has several kinds of volitional verb forms. We have several in English as well. And so before we start looking at how the Hebrew volitionals look, I want to just talk about the concept here of the different types of volitional verb forms. Some people say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I do have a few pictures I'll put up here for you. So let's talk about the three sorts of volitional verb forms. The first kind are going to be called cohortatives. Cohortatives. And these are volitional verbs in which the speaker, who's the subject, is going to desire that the subject do something. Okay? With all the volitional forms we're going to look at, we need to keep in mind that the volitional form is indicating the will of the speaker, but the question is, who does the speaker want to perform an action? And in cohortatives, the speaker wants a first-person entity to perform the action. So we might look at it this way. Here's a little picture, okay? Say that there's a speaker who would be the I in that particular scenario, and the addressee would be the you. And what the speaker is doing is something is coming out of the speaker's mouth. It's an instruction, as it were, an expression of will, but it's not the speaker's will that the you do something. It's rather the speaker's will that the speaker do something. Okay? I'm expressing my will about what I do. And we might translate these cohortatives in this way. Let me do X. May I do X. Or I will do X. Okay? Now, you know very well that there is not only one first-person form in Hebrew. We have singular first person and plural first person, right? So if the speaker is expressing the speaker's will, not just that the speaker do something, but that the speaker and those associated with the speaker, then we would say, let us do this. May we do this. We will do this. Okay? So realize cohortatives can be singular or plural, I or we. But the speaker desires that the I or we act. Okay? So when you hear, may I do this, it's not necessarily a matter of expressing or asking for permission to do it. It would be like saying, may we all be happy, right? That's not asking permission to be happy. It's an expression of my will that we be happy. Okay? So that's the cohortative idea. The second kind of volitional form is the imperative. Now, you know what imperatives are. Imperatives are commands to somebody to do something. So remember, with volitional forms, the person whose will is being expressed is the speaker's will. But now in imperatives, the speaker wants a second person participant to do the action. What would that look like using our picture? Well, the speaker is telling the you in this scenario to do the action. And in English, it would be expressed in things like this. Go, eat more chicken, the Chick-fil-A cows would say. Okay? We don't use pronouns, second person pronouns in English to express imperatives. We just express the verb. Now, does the you have to be singular in an imperative? No, I could tell one you to do it, or I can tell multiple yous to do it, and it'll be the same in Hebrew. We'll have a way to instruct the you in the scenario, whether singular or plural, to do something that the speaker wants you to do. So those are imperatives. Now, the third term that's used is jussive. Okay, so what are the jussives as opposed to the comparatives and the cohortatives? The jussives are where the speaker expresses the speaker's will that a third person entity do something. So you see, we're working our way down the scale of who's supposed to act based on the speaker's will. I want myself to act, that's cohortative. I want you to act, that's imperative. But if I'm talking to you, but I want this other guy who's not an I or a you to act, then when I express my will that he or she or they act, then that's jussive, what we call a jussive. Now, primarily that's going to be third person. We will see in Hebrew that there are some second person jussives, and we'll talk about those when we get there. But to keep the third person idea prominent, here's kind of what that scenario looks like. The speaker is talking to an addressee, a you, but what the speaker wants to happen is that these third person entities over here do some activity. And Hebrew jussive verbs will be translated in English with these sorts of expressions. Let him do such and such. May he do such and such. May she do such and such. Or let them do such and such. May they do some verb. Okay? If I say, for example, may God bless you, what am I doing? I, the speaker, am talking to a you, but my will is that who do the blessing? That God, and God would be third person, right? And so in Hebrew, I would use a jussive, third masculine singular verb form to indicate that. Okay? So hopefully that helps a little bit just with thinking about the terminology here. So we have cohortatives, imperatives, jussives, and in order, all of them express the speaker's will that I or we do something, cohortative, that you do something, imperative, or that he, she, it, or they do something, jussive. All right. Now that we've kind of got that conceptual framework down, let's talk about how Hebrew actually will create these forms. So on the handout you have in front of you, this is entitled Volitional Verb Personal Endings handout here. The volitional verb forms are those in which the speaker projects his or her will about the performance of an action by a first-person agent, a second-person agent, or a third-person agent. To indicate one's will concerning a second-person agent, the writer generally employs the imperative forms. That's what we're going to talk about first, the imperative forms. That's usually what we think of when we think of volitional verbs. And so we'll start here. Look at the chart here. We've already talked about how the jussive and the cohortatives are for third and first persons. Here's some boxes. Remember, the boxes here represent theoretically any three root letters. For the imperative, you're going to see the three root letters of the verb and then these inflectional endings on the back side. Now, I don't know if you can tell. I hope you can. What you're actually seeing are some familiar endings here. Have you seen those in any of your paradigms? Yes. The deal is this. Volitional verbs are based on the prefix conjugation. The prefixes are the nutty prefixes, and sometimes they have endings on the back side with those prefixes. And all of these volitional forms, the imperative, the jussive, and the cohortative, is going to be based on the prefix conjugation patterns. So how do we form the imperative? Basically, we're going to take the second person imperfect forms, and we're going to chop off the prefix, but leave the suffix on. That's basically all we're doing. Okay? I like to call this chopping off the head. I know that sounds violent, but I've told you, Hebrew is a violent language, right? So you take the imperfect second person and chop off the head, and you've got the imperative. Pretty Pretty simple, okay? So let's walk through how this would normally look. What would the second person imperfect look like for Picard? The imperfect 2ms would be TIF code, right? So what do? We take TIF code and we chop off the prefix. So if I were to do that, what would be left here? Code. So when it's got the prefix, that's a silent schwa. But once I chop the prefix off, this becomes vocal. Okay? So it's just code. Now, you know the cow perfect doesn't have any prefixes. And if we're chopping off the prefixes for the imperative will initially look like the perfect to you unless you remember what the cow perfect's vowel pointing is. What do you normally see under root 1 in a cow perfect? Pakad, long A, right? Pakad, pakada, pakada, right? So here I've got a vocal schwa. That ain't no pakad, is it? It is not. Okay, so pakode. Now over here, I have an alternate form of the second masculine singular command to appoint, right? You're going to translate all of these as to appoint. I'm telling a man to appoint when I say pakode, but I could also see this. It's poke da, and this is the kametz ketuf here. Poke da. That kamete looks like a feminine singular kamete. It's not. It is still a masculine singular second person form. So pakode, most of the time, occasionally poke da. Okay? If it helps you to think of it this way, you've got a schwa followed by what vowel class? The holum is what vowel class? It's U class. So schwa, U class. Over here, kametz ketuf is a U class followed by a schwa. So it's almost like you just flip them. Okay, the vowel class and the schwa switch. Pakode, poke, da. Then add the kamete. Now the second feminine singular is the kirik yod at the end. And what I would have done is, if I can point this way, it would have been pakode. This would have been pakode with a kirik yod. What do vocalic endings do with root 3? They steal them away. They leave the holum open and pre-tonic because they're going to pull the accent to the back. And what does the Hebrew verb like to do with open pre-tonic syllables? They reduce the vocal schwa. Now I have a problem. I have a vocal schwa next to a vocal schwa. You can't do that. This is a Red Ryder issue. And we take the Red Ryder BB gun and we shoot out an I, and it gets to be kirik. And then the schwa becomes silent here. Pick D. Okay, so I'm telling a woman, appoint. Same thing here. I just add the shurik instead of the kirik yod for you men. Pick do. So pakodu becomes pikdu. And then the second feminine plural is pakodna. Here, there's nothing funky that happens. Just chop off the prefix on tif kodna, and you've got pakodna. All right? So those are your imperative forms. So the second kind of volitional form that we want to look at forming is the jussive. And most of the time, the jussive is going to be third person. We will talk about where we might find second person jussives in just a little bit. But the third person jussives are, again, like the imperatives, formed off of the imperfect conjugation pattern, the prefix conjugation pattern. What do we see when we see the imperfect? Basically, we're going to see the nutty prefixes of the third person singular and plural forms. Remember, the 3ms prefix conjugation has a yod prefix and no ending after your 3 root letters. He will do something. 3fs has a tav prefix. She will do something. 3mp, yod in front, shurik on the back. They will do something, and it's a masculine plural they. And then a prefix tav with na at the end and a silent schwa there under root 3 for they women will do something. Well, the jussive is going to use all of the same prefixes and suffixes as the imperfect third person forms. And most of the time, you will not be able to tell the difference between an imperfect and adjussive. There are some verbal forms where you can tell the difference. But for now, just realize that pretty much the imperfect and the adjussive will look the same. They will map onto each other. But you're going to translate the adjussive differently, because the adjussive, the speaker is expressing his or her will that he, she, or they do something. So you're going to translate a third masculine singular adjussive as let him or may he do such and such. Third feminine singular adjussive, may she do something or let her do something. And third masculine plural and feminine plural will be may they or let them do such and such. So here's how the forms will look. And these will all look familiar to you. Yifkod, tifkod, yifkadu, and tifkodna. That's the actual cal vowel pointing. The reason I give you the boxes with just the prefixes and suffixes shown there is to show you that all of the stems will have jussives, and they're all going to use the same prefixes, whether we're talking about the cal stem or the nifal stem or the pl stem and so forth, stems that you'll learn once we get to chapter 25. Those will have different vowel points, but the prefixes and suffixes will be the same. Okay? So yifkod, say that with me, everybody. Yifkod. So this would be something like may he appoint. Tifkod, may she appoint. Yifkadu, may they appoint. And tifkodna is may they female appoint. All right. Any questions about this? All right. The cohortative, remember this is the first person forms where the speaker wants I or we to do something. And look at what we're doing here. We're using the imperfect conjugation's first person prefixes. Remember, that's the nutty aleph and the nutty nun. Our nutty prefixes are still going to be used. But what's going to occur, and this will make the form distinct from the imperfect first common singular and first common plural, is we're going to get an additional comma hey attached to root 3. You don't see that in the imperfect first person forms. They get the prefixes, but there's usually 0 ending on the backside. Here we're going to have this extra comma hey along with the nutty imperfect prefixes for the first person. Now, where a lot of students get a little bit messed up on these comma heys is they instinctively think of the comma hey as being a third feminine singular ending, because in the cal perfect, that's the case. Pakad, he appointed. Pakada, she appointed, right? But remember, we're not dealing with the perfect here. We're not dealing with the suffix conjugation at all. We're dealing with the imperfect and prefix conjugation patterns. And a comma hey does not mean feminine singular. Comma hey on the prefix conjugation forms means volitional form, okay? So that's really what you need to be thinking. If you remember, the cal imperative 2FS or 2MS form is pakod, but it had an alternate form, pokda. And that comma hey there is the same kind of comma hey that we're seeing here. It's indicating a volitional form, okay? So down here, I've written for you the cal imperfect first person forms, NIF code and F code over here, just so that you can see what they look like in the cal imperfect. I will appoint, F code, NIF code, we will appoint. What will the cohortatives look like? F kada, that would be let me or may I appoint. And nifkada. Nifkada. So you see the difference here? F code, add the comma hey to F code, and the holum is going to reduce to a vocal shava. I get F kada. F code, F kada. F code, I will appoint. F kada, let me appoint. Nif code, we will appoint. Imperfect. Nif kada, let us appoint. Okay, so these are the imperfect forms up here. That makes sense? All right. So efkada is let me appoint or may I appoint. Okay, so I'm expressing my will as the speaker that I appoint someone. Nifkada is I'm expressing my will that we appoint. So it's let us appoint or may we appoint. So let us appoint. May we appoint. Okay?